This book helped me pay over $25,000 in debt in the last 3 years, and the crazy thing is I didn't even realize it. So in this video, we're going to go over 9 lessons from the psychology of money that took me from broke and living on public assistance to landing my dream 6-figure job in real estate and getting to move out on my own in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Alright, let's get started. So growing up, education was always the #1 priority in my family. We were always taught that if you ever wanted to succeed at all in life, you needed to have that college diploma, and for the longest time, I actually believed it. Even though I wasn't the best student academically, consistently getting B's and C's in my classes, I eventually ended up going to college, only to drop out after 5 years. I wound up working as an office cleaner where I felt like I failed everybody, from my family to my friends, and most importantly, me. But oddly enough, this was the point where I started listening to more personal finance content from creators like Graham Stephan, Dave Ramsey, and this is even the time where I got this book. And in the very beginning of the book, there's a great story about the gas station attendant and the executive. See, the executive was your stereotypical rich person. He paid for lavish dinners, he bought gold coins just to throw them out into the ocean. He even got mad and yelled at workers when he was told to pay for a lamp that he had broken. Classic rich people, right? Meanwhile, the gas station attendant was someone who didn't have a fancy degree, didn't have a fancy job, and lived a more subtle life. But here's the crazy thing. The executive actually wound up going broke after some time, while the gas station attendant went on to become a multi-millionaire. And if you're anything like me, you're probably listening to that and wondering, how is that possible? Well, while the executive was quite literally throwing his money away into the ocean, the gas station attendant was simply investing money into the stock market. It wasn't a lot of money, but because he lived such a subtle life, he was able to consistently invest every single month to the point that he grew a nest egg of over $8 million by the time he passed away. This story really stuck with me because it made me feel like I wasn't as much of a failure as I thought I was, and that night I wound up going home, creating my first budget, and started putting away $50 every single check to my savings. Now, it didn't move the needle much, but it did instill a new set of habits in me that I was able to scale up once my income increased. All that to say, you don't need a fancy degree or a great job title in order to be good at managing money, because money is more about habits and behaviors than it is about vanity metrics like your salary and your degree. One thing about the younger me was I was super impatient. I wanted everything right now or as fast as I can get it, and because of that, I fell for every single get-rich-quick scheme or course that was out there, from drop shipping to social media marketing and to, yes, multi-level marketing, twice. But it wasn't until I read this book and it gave me the example from Warren Buffett where things finally decided to click. See, Buffett is worth over $150 billion. But he didn't get that way off of get-rich-quick schemes or the latest investment strategies. He simply started young and put whatever money he could into the market. Then he repeated it over and over and over again, putting money into the market until eventually his investments took on a life of its own. Now, while I may not be able to get a time machine to bring myself back to age 11 and start investing the way Warren Buffett did, I did take some of these lessons with me in my own investing journey. So I simply opened up a Roth IRA through M1 Finance and started investing anywhere between $50 to $100 from every paycheck into the market. While it's very likely I'm not going to be worth $150 billion, because I started investing earlier in my life and got into it consistently, I'm now on track to be worth almost $2 million by the time I'm ready to retire. And the same way it's not too late for me, it's not too late for you. You can get started investing with as little as $10 a month if you have it, and you can always scale this amount up later. You get into the habit of investing now, and eventually compound interest is going to help you grow that money more than what you can imagine. Right, so in chapter 5, there is a great story about the real estate developer and the stock trader. Now, both of these guys were very successful, earning millions of dollars over the course of their careers. And while their paths didn't necessarily cross personally, they did live through one of the most infamous moments in US history, which was the Great Depression. In October of 1929, more than a third of the US stock market was dropping, and the developer, who was heavily invested in the stock market during this time, was financially ruined by this. However, the trader actually ended up shorting, aka betting against the market, and made a fortune off of this. But we'll come back to that story later because I promise you the ending is not what you expected. But over the last few years, as I've grown with both my income and my career, I constantly find myself in these new eras where I have to constantly change my strategies financially. In my early 20s, when paying off debt and starting my investing was my main focus, I took a very aggressive approach to this because, hi, I'm impatient. but that impatience ended up costing me a lot time and time again. I would use my last $300 a month just to pay a little bit extra on the debt, just to get hit with a surprise medical bill or an annual subscription that I forgot about. And it took this happening multiple times before I got it through my head that I needed to have some kind of defensive plan for my money instead of just going on offense. So then that's when it finally hit me that I needed to have an emergency fund. Now, at the very beginning, my emergency fund wasn't a lot of money, just like a $100 buffer in my checking account in case there was another subscription service I forgot. But over the years, as my income grew, I was able to put more away in savings. So that $100 became $200, which then became $500. And then I got down the Dave Ramsey wormhole, which escalated up to $1,000. Fast forward to 2025, I now have about 3 months of my income saved just in case I lose my job or something happens to me medically. But I'm about to enter a whole new era of life because I have my girlfriend moving in, we have a dog together, so I'm gonna have to start saving more money. The lesson here is, as you start to make more money, which you will need to start having a backup plan in case life happens. Because you don't want to end up like the developer where one bad turn financially completely ruins you, and an emergency fund is going to be that safe space for you. Right, so in chapter 7, there was a psychologist by the name of Angus Campbell who conducted a research about what actually made people happy. He published it in his 1981 book, A Sense of Well-Being in America, and said that the single biggest denominator on happiness wasn't necessarily somebody's job title, how much money they had in the bank, or the size of their house. It was actually how much control that person had when it came to making decisions on what they wanted or didn't want to do. Now, if you ask teenage me, I wanted to be rich because I wanted all of the stuff. I wanted the mansions, the Lamborghinis, the fame, the fortune. And as I got older, those things stopped becoming important to me. The Lamborghinis and the mansions started getting old, and if you pull up any video from TMZ, fame and fortune just feels like too much of a hassle. Nowadays, what I really want out of life is just time, because we spend so much time doing things that either do or don't fulfill us that the days feel like it speeds by as you get older. I mean, take my schedule for instance. I wake up at 6 a.m. and I'm out the door by 7:30 for work. It takes me about 45 minutes to commute to the office. I work from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., do another 45 minutes back home, and then the second I get home, I start working on this YouTube channel. And before I know it, it's 10 p.m. and I need to get ready to go to bed. So as I've gotten older, my mindset has now shifted from how can I make more money to how can I get more time? Because I'd much rather be sitting here at this desk talking to you guys through a camera than working on my 9 to 6, 5 days a week. And honestly, that should be what we're all striving for. How can we do the things that we feel fulfilled to do? So next time you're worrying about how to make X amount more money, worry about how should you go about getting more time back. Okay, this is probably one of my favorite lessons in the book. So in 1936, there was a man who fled from Nazi Germany over to the United States. And by the 1990s, he went on to become one of the biggest art dealers with a collection that was well worth over $1 billion. But what makes this my favorite story is that a majority of that $1 billion that his collection was worth was actually only from a handful of paintings. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but I tried everything to be successful early on in life. I tried college, I tried side hustles, I tried YouTube multiple times. Even when I settled in on my real estate career, my first commission check was only $60. But it only took one tail event of getting an interview for a leasing manager role that changed the trajectory of my life. And it's not just happening to me or you, but happens everywhere. Your favorite YouTube creators didn't blow up to get 100,000 or 1 million subscribers overnight. They constantly put out videos with most of them not getting any traction at all. But a small handful of them ended up finding the algorithm and caused most of their growth. The lesson here, don't get discouraged if you're hearing a lot of no's or you feel like you're constantly failing, because you're only one, if not a couple of positive moments away from outweighing everything. Okay, so there's something about luck and risk that doesn't seem to necessarily sit well with people. But the truth is, these are forces that factor a lot of outcomes in our lives. And one of the best examples from the book is Bill Gates. Gates went to high school in Lakeside High, right outside of Seattle, Washington. Lakeside was also one of the first schools to get a supercomputer back in 1968. So around the time of there being about 303 million high school age students around the world, only 300 of them went to Lakeside. Meaning Bill Gates had literally a 1 in a million chance of going to a high school that actually had a supercomputer in there. Sounds crazy, right? And we all know how the rest of the story goes. Bill Gates goes on to co-found Microsoft. Now he's worth billions of dollars. But the lesson is we probably wouldn't have these things if it wasn't for that little bit of luck. And that's something I have to constantly remind myself, is that no matter how much I personally work, luck and risk is going to play a factor in whatever outcome I get. And the best example is with my current job. Previously, I was working at a nonprofit where we owned and rented apartments that went to families with lower incomes and apparently serial killers, but that's a story for another time. But around the time I interviewed for my current role, I didn't have any experience in leasing on the landlord side, and I definitely didn't have experience on leasing in high-end luxury rentals. But after a stroke of luck and a lot of follow-up emails, the general manager decided to give me a chance and offer me the job. And from that point on, I've been able to build my career to the point that rather than working in one building, I now work in 7, which is amazing. But I never forget that luck did play a role in all of that, and it could have easily went the other way around. Which is why I implore everybody to just embrace the fact that luck and risk does play a factor in everything, because even though you can have a streak of bad luck, you're only one lucky event away from drastically changing everything, just like the last lesson. Okay, before we get to the next lesson, if you're getting value out of this video, do me a favor, drop a like down below. It will greatly help out the channel. But let's talk about lesson 8, which is something I have a lot of personal experience in. So growing up, I've had a lot of disagreements with my family about things like money, education, and careers. More specifically, I remember points where it was me and my mom on one side of the aisle versus my dad and my grandmother on the other. My dad and my grandmother are more traditional thinking that you need a college diploma, you need to have a good career in corporate America, that way you can have a good retirement. Whereas me and my mom were on the opposite side, thinking that college isn't necessarily for anyone and you don't really need a degree in order to have a good career. And I used to think my family were just having this disagreement because they love fighting, but it wasn't until I read this book that I started understanding the reasons behind the way they think. Because while all 4 of us did have the same level of education and very similar upbringings, we had 2 entirely different relationships with money. See, to my grandmother and my dad, this traditional route to them meant safety and security, and at the end of the day, they really wanted what they thought was the best for me. My mom and I, on the other hand, both were able to carve out full-fledged careers without needing a college degree, which is what sparked our current way of thinking. Now, over the years, beliefs have shifted to the point that my dad is more on my side, but this is disagreements that you still see to this day. How many times do we hear stories about Gen X and boomers talking about the younger generation needs to buy a home and millennials are just like, we can't? That's because Gen X and boomers were living in a time where they were able to buy homes at a young age because prices were low, but interest rates were ridiculously high. Meanwhile, us millennials are going through a housing shortage and have been through a lot of economic events, whether it's the pandemic, the Great Recession, and other economic spaces. The point here is no one's particularly right or wrong in what they're thinking, because we're all just playing the game based on our own personal experiences. Okay, there's this whole trend on YouTube with creators talking about why everybody looks rich, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. They're swiping their way towards a lifestyle that they can't afford. I see it all the time living here in New York City, whether it's a prospective resident looking for an apartment or a complete stranger that is decked out in designer brands. Many of them are just putting up fronts for a life that they can't afford. And in the beginning of chapter 9, there's a quote that I absolutely love that says, spending money to show people you have money is the fastest way of having less money. That couldn't be any more true. Take Alex Hormozy, for instance. The man is worth over $100 million, but if you saw him walking in the street and had no idea who he was, you wouldn't know that at all, because you'll just see him wearing shorts and a tank top all day, every day. And I'm slowly trying to implement that in my own life by not spending absurd amount of money on things like clothes, sneakers, gadgets, and I implore you to do the same, because the less money you spend on all of these things is the more money you could put toward your goals. Okay, this is the last and probably most important lesson in the book. So you remember the story about the developer and the stock trader, right? Well, you probably thought that the stock trader went on to live happily ever after with his new wealth, or that the developer ended up bouncing back and reclaiming his fortune. Unfortunately, you'll be wrong on both parts. What really happened was that the stock trader, all englowed by his new wealth, ended up taking bigger and more riskier trades that didn't necessarily pan out. The losses became so great that he ended up wiping out not only the fortune he gained, but all the money he ever had to his name. And what I learned from this lesson is, while it is important to have big, lofty goals that you want to achieve, it's also equally important to know when enough is enough for you. While there's nothing wrong with going after the big, lofty goals of 10 million, 100 million, or even $1 billion, for a lot of us, we don't necessarily need that much money. a lot of us will be just as happy having something around $1, $5, or even $10 million in our savings. So the important thing that we should be doing is have a number where it's considered enough for us and have that written. The second we get that number, then we know, all right, we're good to live off of. Now we could take easy steps up without risking everything else. Because the last thing we want to do is end up like the developer and the trader. So we talked about how the psychology of money changed my financial life forever. But if you still don't think money psychology is important, I encourage you to check out this video here where we talk about what happens to you mentally when you save your first $10,000. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in that video.